Hey folks, my name is Nate Perry. I'm the Manager of Specialist Planning here in the Grampians region, and I had quite the privilege of being a part of this presentation or this project that you're about to hear quite a bit about. Thought we'd just do a little bit of a welcome. Thanks for everyone for coming as a start, and a bit of a structure on how today's presentation is going to go through. So I think Charlie Tack, who will be presenting after myself, will be going through a bit of how the project came about. That'll be the first part, and then we have a few folks with us today online from DJAARRA, Caleb and Oli. They're going to speak about their role in this project. And then we'll hand over to Brad from the Arthur Wilde Institute, who's going to go through probably the bigger picture, the overview, and some of the findings. And then following that, any partners in the room, anyone on the online who's involved with the project that wanted to share any reflections of their time through this project, we'll open that up for you, but just wanted to have that prompt out there now so you can have any thoughts in mind if you wanted to share those later. And then we'll have time for a question and answer session later on to ask any of the presenters any questions about the findings of the projects, any reflections personally, and where to from here. But before we do go any further, so today we're on Wadawurrung country and wanted to take a moment to pay respects to their elders and ancestors past and present, but also just acknowledge the time that spent on country with Wadawurrung and all of the traditional owner groups involved in this project that you'll come to hear more about. Just really appreciate the time and effort and learnings that we're able to share together. So in addition to Wadawurrung, I'm going to also acknowledge those DJAARRA and Wurundjeri peoples who both participated with us and partnered with us on this project, but also who you hear from today. So thanks everyone, and I'll hand over to Charlie Tack at this stage.
Hello everybody, thank you very much for coming along today. Thank you very much, Nate, for introducing things. Forgive me, some of you may be well aware of the Wombat, some of you probably live in the Wombat area, but I'll just give you a bit of an overview of where the Wombat Forest is. Obviously it's, as per the map, pretty close to Melbourne, sort of 1 to 2 hours out of Melbourne, it's a large area across sort of multiple different sort of land tenures. For purpose of this project, we use the term Wombat Forest to refer to land that is different tenures, so regional park and state forest. Sorry, I should introduce myself a little bit more. My name, I work for DEECA, and when I was leading this role, or leading this project, I was working in forest management planning was the role I was working in, with a focus on state forests. And so this project came about and the focus was on state forests, but in the discussions and in the project, we kind of broadened it, or kind of didn't limit it, shall we say, to state forest boundaries, and kind of considered it on sort of a landscape, in a sort of more of a landscape sort of context. The other key thing to note here is the traditional owners whose country sort of intersects over the Wombat Forest area. Got DJAARRA to the north, Wurundjeri to the east, and Wadawurrung sort of to the southwest, extending down to the coast. Those three boundaries intersect sort of at the headwaters of the Werribee River. So that geography and I guess that proximity to people has kind of made it a very popular area and a very important area with a lot of community values and amenity for a lot of people who live in the area, but also tourists. It also has a lot of ecological importance with diverse ecosystems and threatened species. Historically, I guess one of the things that define the Wombat Forest as we see it now has been the large amount of timber harvesting and mining that has occurred in that area over the last 200 or so years. And that has really changed, as you can see in one of the images, essentially, removed all the forest, turned the soil upside down. And so what we have now is something quite different to what was there years ago. And obviously the threats to this forest are closely linked both to those sort of economic values, the uses and impacts from mining and timber harvesting in the past, but also fires. So Black Ash Wednesday fires is an image at the bottom of where the sort of fire kicked off and moved into the Wombat Forest area. And also more recently, windstorms. So in 2021, there were some significant and widespread windstorms in the Wombat Forest area. So that, particularly the storms, really gave a lot of focus to the Wombat area and Wombat, how the Wombat Forest is being managed. There's a lot going on in this slide. I guess the key message from this slide is there's a lot that sits around managing a forest, a lot more than just, you know, the trees and the people who live there. There's a whole heap of policies and issues that sit around it. Around this time when we kicked off the project in 2022, it was on the back of VEAC, Victoria Environmental Assessment Council, recommendations to change the Wombat State Forest to other types of land tenure. And that recommendation also interfaced, I guess, with the role that I was engaged in, which was trying to do some forest management plans for state forests. So that was a question around how do we manage or work through planning and discussions with about the Wombat Forest area when there was this pending land tenure change that probably wasn't going to take effect and still hasn't essentially taken effect for a number of years. So there was a gap, and how do we work through that? Also at this time, well, in 2020, DEECA made a commitment to Aboriginal self-determination through the release of Pupunali Mamanepu, which is a sort of foundational document to how DEECA does its work, but particularly land management. And I guess looping back to that is also then the storm recovery work. So from the storms in 2021, there was works underway, couldn't wait years to clarify land tenure, couldn't wait years for policies to be clarified, to start the discussion, to really start those discussions with traditional owners about how to manage the wombat. And those storm recovery works did have those discussions with traditional owners, but it really was a catalyst to have a broader conversation about how we're managing the forests in that area. So this was kind of the initial concept and consideration of the project. So the overarching goal was to work with traditional owners to define ways to improve the health of the Wombat Forest. I have included what initially the definition of health was around forest function, structure, species composition, and other features such as water and soil. So that was kind of my thinking when I started, and later on I'll reflect on my thinking of that definition and how it's changed over time. We were keen, like I said, to start the conversation, well, to really give oomph to the conversation with traditional owners about the way ahead for managing wombat forests. It really did provide an opportunity to align forest restoration with the views and aspirations of traditional owners and also other government agencies involved with forest management in that area. We felt this was fundamental as traditional owner voices have been excluded from decision-making for land management since colonisation, and that's been to the detriment of forests and soils and waters, but also to traditional owners, their culture and their health. I also think it's been a missed opportunity for the broader community to also have those conversations with traditional owners. It's been a missed opportunity to learn, engage, foster respect and, you know, develop understanding and to really, I guess, walk together in managing our land. There were some fundamental principles. One of the ones, if you're a land manager, policy context will never be perfect. The stars all won't align where everything's organised and planned and you know what the priority species are and what government's thoughts are on X, Y and Z. Sometimes you just need to get on with things and start the ball rolling. And the other point I came to with this project was, and again, I came to it with let's define what the forests are going to look like in 20 years' time, and how do you get everyone to agree? And that seemed insurmountable. But the thing that I learned was there may never be agreement on the exact endpoint, but often you can get agreement on what to move away from, or what things people don't want for their forests. And often there's a lot of alignment with those things. And often moving away from those things actually gets you much closer to where you want to be in the longer term. So it was in that vein we sort of kicked off the project in 2022, start of 2022, first part. ARI, we got ARI to do the project for us. We did have an initial project scope that sort of detailed deliverables and those sorts of things, but as we quickly worked out, there need to be some refinement of that. It's probably a place of ignorance from my perspective of, let's just, do a project that delivers these things. And ARI were really comfortable with working with the policy uncertainty that government invariably has around it. ARI also has some really awesome skills around social sciences and community engagement, so they were comfortable working in that space. Sometimes people are no idea with trees, not humans, for example. So that was a really valuable contribution to the project. And like I said, they also just had that flexibility and the understanding of why we needed to, be flexible with our project and how we were going to deliver it. Oops, skipped ahead too many. So yes, in developing the project, we obviously identified that there are a large number of other government agencies with land management responsibilities. So we engaged with them through the project. And then obviously also engaged with traditional owners. So I will pass on to Caleb now, who will talk a bit about DJARRA's perspective of the wombat and the project.
Thank you. Before I go into my story and the meaning of the wombat to DJARRA, I would like to say Womanjika Noten Jangak Nabange Janda Dunma, which pretty much translates to I welcome you all to my mother's father's country, my country. Thank you. So I am a DJARRA man. My Nabangi, or my ancestor, is Thomas Dunolly from the Mount Franklin clans. He derives from the Manyugan ditch in the Galgalbalag. During my time in the forest, I felt at home. I accepted and welcomed my new dream and totem, the wombat. The mirror, the spirit of the forest is sick. Traditions such as Wadarong, Jajarong, and Rundri have been absent from the forest, not being able to heal its mirror, spirit, and the forest not to guide DJARRA, give us the direction as it itself feels lost. So my story, my involvement with the wombat and health study starts a couple of years ago. So previously, the Wombat State Forest was a very unknown and untouched area in regards to studies done by DJARRA or even archaeological sites or assessments. I was brought on by DJARRA to commence in community relationship and guidance of cultural standards by DJARRA to Vic Forest. The reason why I was brought on is because of the wind frame damages from the 2021 June storms. And during those storms in June 2021, there was a widespread damage across Victoria. That's included the Wombat State Forest. It was somewhere between 1.9 million hectares of public land, 34 local government areas, and even more further damage was done with the October 29th storm. So today I'm talking about an area that was heavily impacted. And this was an area of works for DJARRA. It's to understand it and adapt to a shift. And the shift was where I can apply my cultural ideas and practices, even protecting the cultural heritage, which was unknown at the time. During this time, I met amazing people like Sean Fagan from Waterong. I heartily welcomed him to DJARRA country, and he did the same across the board at Waterong. And during that time, he casually mentored me a Western and cultural perspective. And there was also Vince White and the Vic Forest team for allowing me to come on to guide them and also to teach me about the Western science of the forest. So an area I have selected is a very significant area, and it's a very diverse area because as before, there wasn't much in my area of work. So I work in the cultural heritage sector, or the Malamia team at DJAARRA, and using my cultural knowledge, and I'd set out a very extensive research in my own time, a little bit of time during work and also on field. And as the time of being on country Vic Forest for I think like a year, constantly going out every week, pretty much half my time was in that forest. And yeah, and made some very big discoveries about that cultural landscape. Babbitt's Hill, for instance, one of the high points in that forest for DJARRA. South of it, you have the Blue Mounts and all that, which is a very significant landscape and story that I've pieced together from a DJARRA's perspective. Sorry. Previously, it was a volcano, and yeah, even if you go there to this day, you'll see the basalt flow on the eastern side going towards the Loddon River. And as I said, being allowed to be on country for extensive time, I came across a fair bit of cultural heritage within that area that hasn't been discovered. You have to walk pretty deep into the forest to even find it. And it was a very surprising thing because I actually went around DJARRA, asked, oh, what do you know about the forest? And is there what cultural heritage? And it was very unknown if there was any because of the past forest and history. And I made some dot points here and to explain DJARRA's cultural significance now that was uncovered, that story. And I would like to start at a significant area where my ancestors camped at, is Trentham. And Trentham holds a very diverse amount of archaeological discoveries. Yeah. It has a very dense amount of taccolite. Taccolite is a unique geological material, which is basalt quickly cooling down, causing it to become like an obsidian glass, but as a basalt form. And it has like a nice crystalline structure through it. But DJARRA's main source would be up near Malmesbury. So how did that taccolite get to Champion? As you see, I outlined areas in blue and shaded areas in blue. The areas outlined in blue are main travel points. And the very unique part about Jandak, DJARRA country, is most of our waterways flow in complete different directions. You have the Colobin, which flows north, which is on the right, that goes around the eastern side of Trentham. And on the western side of Trentham, you have the Loddon, which flows south. So with that, at Babbitt's Hill, there was canoe trees found up on the hill and scarred trees down around it. And there was another interesting creek further to the left, which is Kangaroo Creek, which has a lot of scarred trees, bark slabs, scars, and also grinding grooves, showing there was tool making happening in that landscape. So that showed me that Trentham's camping area was further than what it is. And then I started looking into further information about smoke trails and trading. And through that, the smoke trails, DJARRA would go probably on top of Babbitt's Hill and light a fire, create smoke, which we've signaled Waterong or Wurundjeri And with the Blue Mountains being south, that would be the next closest high point. So DJARRA would like their smoke, Wurundjeri would like their smoke, and that pretty much is a phone call saying, hey, meet us at the border. And when they meet at the border, they would trade or meet. We would welcome them on our country to come up to Mount Franklin for ceremony, marriage. And it is a very thing that Wadawurrung, Djabwurrung, and Djadwurrung actively met on the border and came onto each other's country to do marriage and trades and ceremony together. They're significant meeting points, such as for us would be Luggambuk or Mount Franklin. And through that, I kept digging in. And that's where I learned about the cultural thin-ins, cultural burns, and creation of open fields within the Wombat State Forest. And the reason why these open herb-rich grasslands were important for DJARRA to open up is because these were hunting grounds. Animals such as the wallabies, kangaroos, wombats, emus loved open landscapes. So if you can make an attraction by opening up certain parts of the landscape where it's flat, all these animals will come to it. And my ancestors will utilize fire as a cultural burn, but also as a hunting tool. They will split into groups. So in the northern, where they planning to direct these animals with the fire, there'll be an ambush up on a ridge, or they would make little buck shelters and hide themselves behind rocks and jump out when they successfully light the fires, which deters animals from running a certain way, so it points them towards that direction. And also in the off season, the Wombat State Forest gets too wet, so we didn't actively camp in it, but we still come back to resource cover. And during that time, these open landscapes were maintained by the animals. So the wombat, emus, and kangaroos tilled the soil for us, made sure that landscape stayed tilled, and for it to promote that biological growth. And through that, which is very beneficial to us because that tilled the monong, the vanilla, and the chocolate didn't like daisies, and which gave a chance for the tubers, the herbs, and the native plants to actually promote to grow in these areas. So then resource governance was a huge part. Canoe trees were in the wombat were actively used with stringy bark because it was such a pliable and also very easily manipulated material. Didn't require much prep time. You just needed to soak your bark in the water and get your clay and all that, shape it from there. Or just unlike red gum, where you got to place it over fire with weights and whatnot just to create that pliableness. Stringbuck is that well sought after in that region just because how easy it is to make canoes. And there was yellow gums and red gums also in the Wombat State Forest, where it was very used for axe handles, digging sticks, fire sticks, and even spears. And I brought up the basalt from Babbittons. The basalt at Babbittons is really good quality. Pete McCurley actually took some back to DJARRA Timbers and create this beautiful monong sculpture out of it, and it came out so beautiful. And that showed that basalt was a really good quality. So you have a stone quarry source of basalt. You have all these resources for wood, herbrich, and all that. So I can understand why Trampham was a really good landscape to camp at. Not just that you were close to your neighbors, you just had that social network. Djadwurrung people were referred as sharp speakers in the South because of how sociable we were, the multiple dialects we had to learn within the Kulin Nation. And and that's pretty much that story of that area and DJARRA's recovered history through theory and speculation, and while being on country, seeing that evidence there. These are some examples of what is found. On the left, we have this really old growth tree that was fallen with a scar. And then that really small one was actually up against Kangaroo Creek. It was a canoe scar, but on the back, there was also a shield scar. And in the middle, you'll see me next to this very old growth stringy bark, which amazed me when I discovered it because it has a crack through the middle. And the reason why a crack through the middle of a tree is you can make occupational trees. Women can do their business and make sacred trees. Even men can utilize a tree like that to this day for possum smokings. And the bottom right of that is just a small Fullerman scar. And then we go to the right, which is an old yellow box, which shows that old yellow box. They took a scar to it and also dug into it a little bit, which created that shield that was taken from that tree. That was my part, and I'll pass it off to Oli.
Thanks so much, Caleb. And it's, great to be here with everyone. So I'm just going to move to the next slide. So DJARRA kind of got involved in this project at the very same time that Caleb was working on this work in the Wombat Forest that he's just shared, but also a bunch of DJARRA people working with community were developing the Gulk Delcunha Forest Gardening Strategy back in 2022. And so we started being involved in this Wombat Health Study as that strategy had been launched. And really what Gulk Delcunha means, well, it translates in DJARRA language to care for many trees or forests. And it's really DJARRA's core strategy to deliver on our Delcunha Jar Country Plan, which is DJARRA's kind of seminal land management and corporate management strategy that was developed with community back in 2013, 2014. And the Gulk Delcunha Forest Gardening Strategy aligns with each of the 9 goals in the country plan. So that covers all things from employment for DJARRA people, all the way through to restoring the health of rivers and waterways, restoring upside down country, protecting cultural heritage like Caleb was just talking about, and joint management, which is kind of the theme of today's discussion in terms of the Wombat Forest. So it's a really important strategy. It also is a 12-year strategy that runs in conjunction with the country plan to 2034. And now we're about 2.5, 3 years into that implementation, and already with some really exciting things that I'll talk a bit about later today. So the forest gardening strategy has this vision, and that's really around when Jandak or DJARRA country is thriving, then DJARRA people are thriving, and vice versa. The strategy talks to these really key principles. So around culture, managing country, leadership and collaboration, and economic empowerment. And the strategy also articulates this forest gardening toolkit, which covers some of the things that Caleb's already been talking about, which was really important land management practices that DJARRA people have been conducting across central Victoria, but in places like the Wombat Forest for thousands of generations. And now we're through the DJARRA Corporation and our ranger crews and teams conducting these activities in the contemporary setting. So that includes cultural thinning, which is articulated in the strategy. And we've been doing trials of that through in the Wombat Forest, and this health study that we're talking about today was really important sort of baseline to start some of those activities. It talks to revegetation and rehabilitation of degraded lands and landscapes, so restoring the species mix in terms of trees and understory that are now missing because of past practices, which Charlie talked to earlier. It talks to regenerative practice, which is around working with private landholders and other organisations, particularly around the margins of public land. So around the Wombat Forest, we're working with landholders, groups like Landcare, so that we can start dealing with cross boundary threats like pests and weeds and things like that. It also talks to cultural burning. So cultural burning, or jandakwi, is a tool of forest gardening. And through our work in the Wombat Forest in the last couple of years, we've been able to bring fire back to the Wombat Forest, which is really exciting. And Caleb talked to this, but the importance of waterways across DJARRA country for DJARRA people is really important. And so another tool is restoring the health of waterways and wetlands, and particularly the Wombat Forest as the headwaters of many of those important rivers that Caleb was talking about. That run across DJARRA country is a really important place to be healing country to get that positive impact further north for all DJARRA people and country as well. So I'm going to hand on now to Brad.
Wonderful. Thank you, Oli, Caleb and Charlie. Just going to take control here and see how we go. Fantastic. Firstly, thank you. Wonderful context for the presentation today. And particularly, you know, from hearing from Caleb again there, just kind of brings back so many memories of our time together and the sharing of stories and knowledge, which was so important for this study. So my name's Brad Farmilo. I'm predominantly a plant ecologist at the Arthur Rylah Institute, and myself and Steve Sinclair were kind of co-leading the project that was delivered for Charlie and her team, but we're also supported by Oli Moraes and Jocelyn Moore from ARI as well. So I'd like to thank them. I'm now going to take you through our process for kind of capturing the views, the values and objectives of the partners, and so all those partners were mentioned by Charlie and a moment ago, and then how we use some of this information and some of the findings from the work. So we really wanted to get a better understanding about what's important about the Wombat Forest, what are the objectives that we'd like to see realised over time, what are some of the actions that can happen in the forest can help realise those things, and a bit of a vision for the future. But before I kind of get into that, I kind of acknowledge that the approaches that I'll describe today are not new. In the early days of community forestry and participatory action research, you know, these were really powerful tools that have been around since the 60s. So these efforts, like the ones that I'll describe today, were about bringing people together, First Nations people, local communities, forestry workers, Western scientists and professionals. We're just kind of building on that. But it's also important to note that there are also many ways to kind of build collaborative approaches to thinking about forest management. So some approaches will work in some places, and some approaches will work better in others, or within different social contexts. So that's an important thing to note here. What we've got is what I'll describe as a really, what I would deem to be quite a successful approach to collaboration and engagement, but it's one of many. And so I wanted to quickly run us through our steps to the collaborative process, because it was really about kind of sharing knowledge, understanding things and documenting values and aspirations. But the very first thing that we had to establish when doing this kind of work was making sure that trust was kind of at the forefront of what we were doing. It's essential to any collaborative process, and it takes time and effort to establish. It wasn't just about showing up. It involved demonstrating respect for cultural knowledge, listening deeply, and showing a genuine commitment to shared goals. It was also really important that we understood the context. You know, from ARI's perspective, we don't want to come in here and ask all these partners about things that they've already documented, like in the country plans and the forest gardening strategies and things like that. We needed to be across all those documents to make sure that we weren't trying to reinvent the wheel here. So we went away and we made sure that before we came to any engagement sort of work, that we were across the body of research and stories that tells us about what we know about this Wombat Forest system to date, and what people value. And we also kind of reviewed previous attempts at collaborative forest management in the Wombat as well, so that we could try and learn from those. But the main part of the work that we were doing was around these consultations with partners. And we did this as a series of 2 workshops where we held workshops with groups independently. So each of the First Nations groups and what we would term the agency groups, which were comprised of all those other logos that Charlie had up on the screen, sort of independently. And that was kind of a conversation that we had with the partners as we set up. That was how they wanted to work, and we were happy to accommodate that. We used the principles of structured decision-making and expert elicitation to guide our approach to the workshops. We conducted these workshops in a kind of standard meeting room environment, much like what we're currently here in. However, as a way of building trust and allowing contributors to feel comfortable, we began each workshop with a visit to the forest. And we made sure that the meeting rooms were close to the forest so that everyone would have an opportunity to start the day in the forest, where we would be able to see it in its current state. We would be able to also kind of imagine what it might look like in the future if, things go well and we can work well together to improve its overall health. And we used a few different ways to do that, some meditative techniques and things like that, which were guided by Steve Sinclair and Maddie Miller, and I appreciate their input there. But when we got into the nitty-gritty of the workshops, workshop 1 was really about identifying all the values that partners saw in the forest. And these were broad, so they could be large or small scale, they could be biological, social, cultural. So we got the butcher's paper out and we went psycho and wrote down heaps of stuff. And our job was then to kind of consolidate these big lists of all these values into what we call objectives. So we were asking people, what do you care about? What are your values? We would then convert those values into an objective. So that's like giving us some indication of what we want to see change. The value might be species diversity. The objective would be, we want to see the diversity of species increase, for example. And then we converted all these objectives into an objectives hierarchy. So it's 50 to 70 different objectives, but they're all kind of nested. So we've got high level ones and nested ones below it. So that was workshop 1. We fed that information back to the partners to make sure it was correct and we didn't include any sensitive information or anything like that. And that was workshop 1 done. Workshop 2 happened a couple of months later, and that was to kind of build on the work that we'd done in workshop 1. So our first step was around taking those really high level objectives and talking with the partners about them. And the first step that we wanted to sort of embark on was, can we rank them? Can we identify which of these things we care most about? And so we worked through that process with all of our partners in that second workshop. And then another part of that workshop was also then thinking about the actions. So like, forest management actions are diverse and they can come out from a Western or a traditional kind of perspective. We wanted to put up sort of 10 actions that might be actions in the forest, but they could also be things like social and cultural things, around education or tourism or anything again was on the cards, and what kind of actions might have the most benefit for the objectives that we were identifying and working with in that workshop. And then we wanted to sort of do the cross tabulation. We wanted to say, okay, for objective 1 and management action A, what's going to happen there? Are we going to get benefit to that objective? And also, how certain are we that we're going to get either benefit or harm? So it was a way of trying to do that elicitation and sort of build in what we expect might happen over 20 or 30 years, assuming we've got making some rather big assumptions. We've got funding and, things are working in a really positive collaborative environment. What are the likely outcomes going to be? And during those workshops, as I mentioned, we were visiting the forest, but particularly after the forest, we also saw a kind of a real need to get out and spend more time on country. And so we added in a component to the work where we wanted to explore specific places. We wanted to link some of those abstract ideas that we discussed in the workshops with kind of tangible outcomes. So we visited some specific sites within the forest. So when working with First Nations people, we would go to their country. We would try and identify places that would be, of various health. So from sort of intact or good quality places or places with lots of value through to degraded places. Be in those places together, discuss their values, discuss what actions might be relevant to those places. And these formed a series of case studies in our reporting. So as an example of that, we visited a spring-fed soak on Wadawurrung country as a case study site. Here we discussed the importance of the site for Wadawurrung people as a place to practice culture predominantly. We identified the important biological and cultural values of the site, and we discussed what types of actions might help ensure that place is protected, because it was in really quite good nick. We wanted to protect it from threats like climate change and weed invasion and pest animals. And so that allowed us to kind of, make those connections between what we were talking about in the workshop with place. There were other examples of case studies where we went to more degraded places with a legacy of past forestry or mining. And so those were an opportunity for us to talk more in that restoration space. So can we make this place resemble something that we would like to see in the future? And we also discussed things like, when should this happen? Should we be focusing our attentions on the places that are still intact, that hold lots of values first, before dealing with these more challenging places as well? So it was an interesting discussion was had. And these case studies made the facilitation process more grounded and demonstrated how values and objectives translate into practical management strategies. So here I'd like to just share some of the outputs from our workshops. On the screen is a list of those higher order objectives that we were working through in that second workshop, and where we began to work through that process of ranking them. So we were able to do this process with DJARRA, Wadawurrung and the agency partners. And you can see there that, the list is quite long. I won't get you to read it all. I'll step you through it. But the one thing to note, I suppose, at this point is that the objectives are coloured. So the red ones are things that are kind of healthy people kind of objectives, which relate to social sort of things. And the charcoal ones are healthy country objectives, which are kind of more biological in nature. And again, these are kind of a subset. These are the high level ones of what would have been like 20 different nested objectives. So the list here is quite diverse. As I mentioned, we're kind of capturing biological, social, cultural values held by each of the different partner groups. And while the table is kind of complex, I think it's kind of a logical place to start is, what do we care about the most? What are the highest ranked things by each of the partner groups? So if we look at the very first objective, both DJARRA and Wadawurrung both ranked traditional knowledge and heritage is protected and continued as the most important objective. For agency partners, it was a different objective, but it was a different type of objective. This was more of a healthy country objective. It's a biological thing. And they ranked vegetation structure as healthy as the most important objective. And this kind of, I suppose, reflects that expectation that if the structure of the forest is restored, then other objectives will also be realised. And we'll note there that I suppose DJARRA and Wadawurrung also thought this was an important objective, but that they had it ranked a bit lower. So in summary, from that table, without kind of getting you to do all the hard work yourself, I'll kind of step you through it. So a couple of the key findings, I suppose, was that agency partners tended to focus more on the healthy country aspects of the objectives, and traditional owners tended to focus more on the healthy people side of things. And this makes sense. This aligns with their responsibilities and their aspirations that they've all documented and that they're expected to focus on. Between the traditional owner groups, rather, you do have variation. They both had the top ranked value, the same top ranked value, but under that, there's quite a lot of variation in the types of things that each group values and ranked. And this is kind of intuitive, as each traditional owner group has distinct cultural knowledge, histories and relationships with country. I think if we think about the types of objectives that had more alignment across the partner groups, it appears kind of healthy country objectives had more alignment between the groups than the healthy people objectives. And this again suggests that there's strong agreement regarding aspirations for the forest itself, country, across the different partner groups, but that each group has its own cultural and social concerns and priorities. And if we consider the suite of objectives, it kind of suggests that the partners have a shared vision of kind of restoration. They want to get things back to what it was. It's not about radical change. It's not about blank canvas, let's start again type mentality. And this emphasis within the objectives was on bringing back the lost forest values. Whether that's through ecological repair or cultural renewal. And the Wombat Forest is seen as something to heal and reconnect with, not to reinvent. But in saying that, when we discuss things like monitoring and understanding how the forest changes through time, the partners were very keen to consider, I suppose, more forward-looking approaches to that type of thing. So, the partners could see a future that embraced new ideas and technologies as well. Oops, sorry, I think I skipped one there. And this is an important also outcome of the project in that we developed a shared vision. So through our workshops and consultations, we co-created a vision for the Wombat Forest. It's ambitious, but it's kind of grounded in the values of all the partners. And it states that the Wombat Forest will be actively cared for by First Nations groups and the government and the wider community, and that it's on a path towards becoming a healthy forest with vibrant biocultural communities. So this is, on face value, it might seem like this can be pretty obvious, right? It's nothing too groundbreaking there, but the important point is that, or the reason that it's special is that it represents the process of getting there. It emerged from deep interrogation of the partner's values, and it embodies the process that we went through. So it was a really important step, and it allows us to it gives us a bit of a foundation to work forward from. So kind of summarising the work, and again, I'm doing my best to summarise it for you in a very short format, but I've also got, we've got a large technical report and a summary document. We've got hard copies here, they're online. I'm sure Andy will share that link at some point. Please, consult those if you'd like to know more or you want to investigate this a bit more thoroughly. But some of the key outcomes and lessons for me was that what we require here is adaptive and active forest management. We will need to get on the ground and get started on things so that we can start to achieve the vision that was set. Waiting to know all the answers to all the questions is probably not something that we have the capacity to work with at this point in time. And that we'll also need to understand how the system changes when we do stuff. So moving forward, it'll be important to get a clear understanding of how health varies across the Wombat Forest and to help identify what places will benefit most from actions and a framework to monitor how the forest changes in relation to actions so that, we can use that knowledge to guide future actions. This will likely require some sort of reference group or governance that incorporates all the relevant partners, and there is some of that work already happening in terms of some of the partners are working collaboratively and kind of continuing some of this work on, which is great to see. But in addition to sort of having a group of passionate collaborators, we'll also need to ensure that this type of work can continue to attract funding to ensure that we can kind of continue to work towards that long-term vision. And it's also important to acknowledge that we have only engaged with a subset of the partners that have an interest in the health of the forest. So, as Charlie mentioned, these are partners with a legislated role in forest management. And also through our process, we had no fundamental conflicts or anything like that. So everything moved quite smoothly for us. But a successful attempt at improving the health of the forest should probably engage with groups outside of our remit at some point. Skipped one again. Bit jumpy with my finger there, sorry about that. And a key lesson from this project is that understanding a forest system and improving its health should be rooted in meaningful engagement with relevant partners and a commitment to actionable outcomes. So it's important to note here that the project is transferable to other things. So the project itself could be relevant to adjacent areas of forest outside of the Wombat on similar country with similar First Nations groups, or the processes we use could also be applied in other places outside of the Wombat. Could pretty much apply anywhere in Victoria really, but there will be limits to that. So, if we try to apply it in a place that's very remote with participants and partners who are geographically very isolated, that this process wouldn't work so well. But it is a bit of an example of a process that has worked quite well in our case and would work well in others. And I just wanted to acknowledge that the work isn't finished. We need to ensure that these relationships and trust that have been fostered through this project go beyond just sharing knowledge, but they also lead to shared planning and decision-making for First Nations partners, which is really the logical next steps and the real expression of authority for First Nations groups, which is something that we should all kind of keep front of mind as we're moving along. It's not just about sharing knowledge and being partners. We need to be working towards a real expression of authority for First Nations partners. But if we can do that, it'll give us the best chance of realising the vision for the Wombat Forest. So that's it from me and the more formal side of things. As Nate mentioned on the lead up there, I'll just kind of stick here with the mic for the moment, Nate, if you don't mind. But there is an opportunity for us to, as presenters, to have a quick reflection. And I think Oli wanted to lead us off with some of those reflections. Is that right, Oli? Do you want to jump in?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah,
And
thank you.
And then we might have the other three presenters briefly present. I suppose we've gone a bit long, so we do want to get to some questions if there are any as well. So, but you go ahead, Oli, do your thing, and we'll work the rest out later.
Yeah, thanks so much, Brad, and thanks everyone for coming. I guess for us, going through this process, there was the key kind of benefit, I think, for DJARRA was to be able to build relationships with other agencies and with Wadawurrung as well in particular through the process, and those relationships that we were able to start building, including with ARI and Brad's team, with Charlie's team in DEECA, the Indigenous Knowledge Institute, who supported some of the workshops as well, have led to many other opportunities and sort of projects that have developed following the health study in the Wombat Forest. So I think that was a really beneficial process of the collaborative approach that was taken by Brad and the team. And I think I can probably speak for you, Caleb, and the others from DJARRA that participated, that was really welcome. I think in terms of other things, going forward, the Wombat Forest is such an important forest for many people, both traditional owners and the general public. And I think the opportunity to develop a long-term co-management plan out of this study, working very closely with Wadawurrung and Wurundjeri and government agencies, provides a lot of, I think, hope for the future that the forest can be managed more holistically, to build resilience to things like climate change. And already since the project, because of those relationships we've been able to build, as I said earlier, we've been able to return cultural fire to the Wombat for the first time in the contemporary setting at one of our trial sites, which is one of the case studies as well in the report, and that Caleb talked about it at length as well at Babington's. But really, excited about where we can work together on shared challenges, whether it's managing pests and weeds or improving resilience or healing waterways, and working with those other agencies to do so. So I think from my perspective, it's been a really valuable process, and really appreciated the approach that Brad and colleagues from ARI and DEECA took in working with us on this project. I'll hand over to you, Caleb.
So from a DJARRA man's perspective, it was a very valuable opportunity to be involved in this, and allowing even the culture heritage team, the other DJARRA members of that region, to actually participate in this study. It gave us a voice, and finally a voice in the Wombat State Forest that was heard. And through that, we got the results that we wanted from those workshops, and to list down DJARRA's aspirations and dreams. An important reflection I saw when reviewing and reading was the different views from Wadawurrung and Djadjarra, the rankings mainly. And Brad talked about it earlier, but it's a different perspective. It's two different country types with their own perspective on their country, their own traumas and the scars on their landscapes. Jarrah was very heavily affected by gold mining, so our perspective on our country is upside down country all throughout. And those traumas and scars influenced our rankings, and it was pretty interesting to see the big difference what Wadawurrung has, and it really puts you in a different perspective how they saw it. And I think going forward, it is a very valuable piece of information. And as Brad said, the work's not done yet. Wurundjeri, Wadawurrung, and Djadjarra would need to come together as a nation, like they used to as the Kulin Nation, and manage this forest together, working in together, doing our aspirations and results from the actual study, and start implementing that. And with everyone's different landscape point of views, none of it's gonna cross over, but at the same time work fluently. I think there's a upside down country question in the chat, so I'll quickly answer that. So upside down country is a term we refer to, is literally means the ground's being digged upside down. So mining has tossed our country on its head. So everything that was below is now above. So I hope that makes a bit of understandable. Like, we refer it as mining. So they dig up the country, the bottom layers of the dirt come to the surface goes to the bottom. It literally is turning that country upside down on itself. But yeah, and it was a very big learning curve even for myself, and I appreciate Brad, the DEECA team, Harry, and everyone else that was participating in this for the opportunity. I'll pass it back to Brad.
Thanks very much, Caleb. Charlie, do you want to come up? I suppose Charlie has a reflection. Mine wasn't too deep, but and I probably covered off on mine in the presentation. Perhaps after you, maybe we can go to any questions from the room or online. Thanks.
I guess for me, what really struck home was looking at those results and reflecting on how our First Peoples look at healthy country, but the important role of humans, I guess, and the sort of you can't pull those things apart. And there was I guess it was something I learned, I guess, from myself. An important lesson that I've learned from this process was, while it's understandable, traditional owner organisations and First Peoples will bring that perspective of people and to land management. That is fundamentally what they are. They are communities of people where people live on country. Country is not something that is behind a fence or happens somewhere else. It's inextricably linked. But then agencies sort of had, people as number 5, and all the other primary values were about NRM. And if you think about it, it makes sense. It was like, well, a lot of us have done natural resource or environmental, and that's what we kind of come to the discussion as, is thinking about the trees. And that's why I kind of flagged it in my earlier slides, that I thought of health as what the forest looked like and composition and that sort of thing. But really, it certainly opened my eyes up to the fact that actually we're not separate, and there's benefits for all of us to think about a healthy forest and healthy landscapes with people being integral to that. I'm really pleased to hear Caleb and all these reflections as well about the project. And I think separate to that, I certainly learned a lot about managing projects with our Aboriginal partners and traditional owner corporation partners to really get those really good outcomes. Like I mentioned, I had an idea in my head as to what the scope and deliverables would be, but I'm really pleased that we actually identified what those objectives were. So as the project changed shape, to deliver what it actually has delivered now, which is so much more useful for everybody than what I first came up with. So I'm happy to talk separately another time, particularly within DEECA, about what I learned about managing projects with our traditional owner partners. So I'll throw, are there any other questions? Andrew, is there any questions online?
I'm yet to see any questions pop up in the chat, but I do want to just thank each of you as the presenters today, Oli, Caleb, Charlie, Brad. I think it's a really rare project, and it's a really rare opportunity to hear directly from you, the reflections from all the different collaborators. And this is very much a additional group assignment that you've willingly put your hands up for. And I think it's a testament to the trust, respect, and the value you see in sharing this work. So thank you for your time in preparing for this over the many weeks that have come up, and for making time today, attending online and in person. It's been a really, really valuable experience, I think, for the over 100 people attending online. So we can discuss sharing this further afterwards. I've done my best to stall for time for questions in the chat. I still don't have any, so maybe we can take some from the room.
Does anyone have a question in the room they'd like maybe Charlie or I or Oli and Caleb to address, perhaps?
Don't be afraid.
We do have one, and we might come to Max online if he happens to be there and would like to have a reflection. Is it Dave?
Dave, yeah.
Hi, go ahead.
Can people hear me, or does it matter?
Can you hear Dave online, Andy?
Yeah, it's good.
Thanks. Congratulations to the project team. Great amount of work, and you can really see the curiosity and the genuine approach in all the work here. I think it's a great foundation. I'm interested in how other areas of the community get involved. If we look at those communities around the Wombat Forest, some of them have third or fourth generation farmers who have been doing the same thing for a while. We have tree changers moved from Melbourne with different values, and we have a whole bunch of sort of different diverse communities in and around the Wombat. I'm interested if there's any ideas from the project team around how those folks are approached and how, you know, potentially brought on board with this sort of thinking, or if the project team's thinking there's a lot of diversity there that you're not sure how to tackle. But interested in your views on that.
Do you have any first thoughts, Charlie? Or sorry, who's that? Yeah. Oli, maybe?
Yeah. A couple of hands up there.
Brad, you got
Yeah, I'll jump in quickly, I think, and I'm just going to skip forward. I had some follow-up slides, but just to show you some photos of some of the work we have been doing in this space. This is one of our trial sites that's mentioned as a case study in the report as well. But there's a couple of images there. This is both DJARRA community doing monitoring and on-country activities, but also including our rangers and broader DJARRA community. But also we've been running volunteer days, managing stuff like gorse and other weeds. So working with volunteer groups and land care groups to actually get people on the ground, supporting our aspirations and delivering positive impacts. But also we've run, you know, dozens of on-country workshops and walks just to bring people along and share what DJARRA is doing in the forest, in the Wombat, and what our long-term vision is. So we're going to continue to find ways to work with private landholders or land care groups or the general community to build their cultural awareness and understanding of who DJARRA is and what DJARRA aspirations are, but also starting to help deliver tangible things on the ground. So definitely look out. We're going to be focusing on that in the next couple of years. And we think it's really important because they are key users and people who love the forest, and we can all be working better together. And I think that's a really something for all of us to take forward. Thanks for the question, Caleb.
I will keep it short as possible, but throughout my time in the Wombat State Forest, pretty much the best approach is just a cup of coffee out in the forest with DJARRA. Even if you don't have the same views as DJARRA, we would always accept your views and learn from your view. And it's a great thing to learn about because we always love to learn about that Western science and the cultural science, mix them together. And a perfect example would be our DJARRA timbers. Pete McCurley, I approached Pete McCurley from actual Uncle Rick, the fella in the top left, second photo, he gave me the phone number. He's like, hey, you should talk to this guy. He has a mill. So me and Jim Brooks went down to his mill, had a cuppa in front of the fire, pouring rain. And from there, it was a beautiful relationship that turned into a local miller into DJAARA Timbers. And there's been opportunities like that. We have reached out to millers and wood companies and even farmers in that region where there was interest for us to learn also, learn about the operations of the forest and working in with them. Even if some foresters had that vision of they just need wood, DJAARA had that vision of healing at the same time. So it's finding that middle ground where we can work together with that community and find ways how both parties can enjoy that forest.
Great, thanks, Caleb. Charlie, did you have anything you wanted to add there?
I'll just, I guess my thought was, sorry, you're right, was just how I guess every land manager has a, I guess, responsibility or a role in talking to community and having those conversations. And you know, and I was aware that the stuff DJARRA was doing, and that's really awesome. And I guess to learn from our previous mistakes rather than leaving people out of the room like we've done with traditional owners for so very long. If everyone is heard and everyone has a place in that room to have those conversations, what is frustrating and makes conversations difficult is when people do feel excluded and don't feel listened to. So I think providing those opportunities for people, and like, you know, like we've discussed, it's not, I'm not talking about some sort of, well, actually, I think the thing, like I mentioned earlier, was to focus on the things that you can kind of get agreement on, because I think there's a lot more of those than what people realise about improving the health of our forest.
Thanks, I think that's sufficient. Was there any other questions or online or in the room? I know we're kind of running a bit late.
Oh, you got one in the room?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. I've got just a general one from online. Gabrielle's wondering if there's any thoughts around how this approach to building a shared vision and for shared management could be applied to other parts of Victoria. I'm not sure if anyone of the presenters have a view on that.
Yeah. Oh, Caleb, did you want to jump in?
Oh, you can get this.
Well, I'll probably just be reiterating what I kind of said a little bit earlier, but yeah, like I think it can apply in other places, and it's really just about, you know, obviously identifying the partners that you're going to work with, and then obviously having some conversations and lead up before you kickstart the process and identifying what things are likely to work best for the people you're engaging with. And I suspect a model like the one that we've employed, where it's very much about being in a place together, and building, you know, or having opportunities to build trust before things really kick off, and also spending time on country. Those kind of elements, I think, will be kind of important for making sure that this works. But yeah, there will be places where there'll be other options might work better. But I think this is a model that can work in lots of places.
And from DJARRA's perspective, it doesn't just apply to one type of forest, such as stringback forest. It can apply to ironbark, grey box forest, any state forest, or even not even forest in itself. This could go to like Bush Heritage or another company that manages their own private or public land. It's not just restricted to forests. These aspirations DJARRA has listed pretty much is outlined in our country plan, and our country plan is of the DJARRA's objectives, goals, and aspirations. So it can be applied anywhere on country. It just doesn't have to be restricted to just one certain area.
Thank you both for that.
Maybe just to add, sort of link to what I was saying earlier is, if we bring people together, particularly getting people out on country in the bush, we can like reach more productive and collaborative outcomes. And it's pretty simple. Like, this is the approach I take with a lot of our work when we're doing engagement in our forest gardening program, is just get people together, go for a walk, like Caleb was saying, have a cuppa, and just talk about things. And, you know, not everyone's always going to agree, but there's always stuff that, you know, that is common ground and that we can agree on. And particularly around forest management, there are ways to progress forward positively with different groups with different interests. But I think it really starts with getting people together. And that's what this approach did, that Brad and Charlie and others led, was about getting people together in a room on country, and start talking about how we can progress and move forward together. And that can work anywhere.
I was just going to say, I think we're 10 minutes over, but this has been a wonderful question and answer session. I don't want to cut it short. Thank you so much, Oli, Caleb, Brad, for those thoughts on that question. I think we might hand over to Nate to close up the session, if that's okay with everyone. But Brad, you can see the room. What's your gauge on the situation?
Yeah, Nate's coming up now. But as he does come up to wrap it up, I'd just like to thank Mark Costello for his comments there in the chat. He was wonderful to work with, and he would be a voice that I'd love to hear more from as well at one point in the future. Nate, do you want to come up and wrap us up?
Thanks, folks. I don't really have personally too much to say, but thanks everyone for joining us online. This is a really great experience with you in person and online dual format. Thanks for your questions. Thanks for all the partners, Caleb, Oli, Max, Sean, anyone who's been mentioned in there, everyone in the room today. For those in the room, we do have some food afterwards. Sorry for those online. You're missing out. But could we just maybe give a round of applause to the people who presented today and everyone involved? See some thumbs up online. If people do want to get in touch and have some more questions, I think the page on ARI will have some contact details. I know Charlie would be open, could send her a direct email. Even myself, I'm happy to link people as well. So thanks everyone, and yes, build on this great work into the future. Thank you very much.
Thanks everyone.